Bill Matthews. Welcome to the Bibliophile.
Thank you.
How's that for an introduction?
Works for me.
You are a seasoned antiquarian bookseller,
Yeah, since 1976.
and you have just bought a bookstore, a long-established bookstore in Sydney, BC. Why'd you do that?
Well, Odean's had the shop since 1996 and wanted to retire, and she was looking to keep it going. You know, someone that was a rare bookseller, and I was in the association, and I would keep it kind of in the same ilk, you know. So this shop opened in 1947, so I'm actually the fifth owner, and it's never closed. But it was one of the principal Victoria bookstores from 1947 until 1996. It was a big Fort Street bookshop. And when I started going, Howard Gerwin owned it. He was the special collections librarian at UVic. He had it from about 76 to 96, and then Odean and her husband bought it and moved it out to Sydney in 96. So it's been in this shop for 25 years now.
And by the looks of it, it's a pretty damn good decision. Number of people coming through the door.
It's busy, even with COVID having cut the tourist thing down. We're not getting any American tourists, and this store actually had a lot of American tourist customers, but I think they'll start to come back. But it's well established. You get people in here whose parents came here and whose grandparents went to the shop in Victoria. So it's a real Victoria sort of institution. So yeah, I felt lucky to be able to get it, and Odean's happy that it's carrying on and not closing.
So what do you think of the reasons for its success?
Well, I think it was always a pretty diverse shop. And Odean she was an academic. She was very hardworking and methodical, and just been kept in really good order. It's a little old-fashioned in the sense that the stock has got a lot of transportation, like a great many train books and airplane books and boat books, you know, which was always a big, important field in the older days.
For collectors.
Yeah, and there was a ton of people interested and a lot of action, but less so now. So I find that business now is more literature. I sell an awful lot of mystery fiction and a lot of general literature, and you know, first editions. I sell a lot of poetry, art, literature, poetry, and I still sell railway books and airplane books and military and stuff, but not so much. I think a lot of those fields are anyway, and she specialized in a few things. She specialized in children's series books, mostly boys' series books, so turn of the century, 1930. So there's hundreds of those, and that's another field that's sort of slow now. So, you know, the younger collectors aren't necessarily going after the same things. So, yeah, the book business has changed.
For the good, for the bad?
Well, it's just different. It's kind of polarized. The internet has made cheap books very cheap and expensive books very expensive. And there's a lot more buying of books as artifacts rather than, you know, people looking for texts to read. And in those cases, you can get the texts for free on the internet.
Yeah.
And so people buying the book, you know, buying an old book, there's just a lot more of people buying it for its physical existence. You know, it's kind of a tactile thing rather than a content. You used to have people looking for years till they needed to read a certain novel or really wanted a text. So that's less of a thing now, and I'm noticing that. And there's nostalgia. I mean, the books people used to be nostalgic for are now, those people have grown old, so they're no longer buying, you know, the pulp magazines from the 40s that they read when they were kids. Those people are now mostly ancient or dying, and so people are buying those things still, but for different reasons, because, you know, they're quaint or ironic or curious. So there's that, you know, nostalgia is like a window moving through time, and so I've really seen the difference in that since the 70s and 80s, when people were still buying things from the 40s and 50s for nostalgic reasons. You know, now they're buying things from 2000 for nostalgic reasons. and I find those books, you know, just new books like that, not as interesting to deal in.
Why is that? Why not so interesting?
I don't know. They're just too common. They're too easy to get. They're kind of mass-produced. There's not a lot of romance around them. I was always more of a prospector in books Scout, and I was a
That's the
seller.
That's the best part,
It was.
right?
I spent my time going out on trips on the road, and we'd go into junk shops and run around
Yeah.
England, the U.S., and looking in all the big old places for learn about secret books and go and find them, that kind of thing. So
Secret books?
yeah, I got one yesterday. Maurice Sendak's first book is the book on atomic energy from 1947.
He designed it.
He was commissioned to illustrate a book
Yeah.
called Atomics for the Millions.
He was in an ad agency.
He was an
one point.
18-year-old. He was just a kid. So that's quite a good book. And that was the book that we always looked for. Things like that. I sort of specialized in pseudonymous and anonymous books. And I got to know a lot of them were. I did a lot of research, which at the time was, 3x5 cards at the library. There weren't any, nowhere looking anything up much, So it's all gotten a bit mechanized now.
What are some of your best pseudonyms?
Oh, I don't know. Oh, gosh, let's see. Well, Edith Wharton's first book, Verses by Mrs. E.N. Jones. Good luck finding that. Or Amy Lowell's first book, Dream Drops by Dreamer. There's a lot of stuff, a lot of authors' first books, and especially when you get back far enough, people were using pseudonyms to protect themselves from prosecution. But yeah, there's and lots of books were issued anonymously. I don't know, Ambrose Bierce's first book, The Fiend's Delight by Dodd Greil. These are all books I've found at one time or another. So anyway, yesterday I got a copy of Atomics for the Millions.
Makes it all worth. That's not all worthwhile, but
it was always a good book. It used to pay for scouting trips. You find a book or two like that, and you could pay for your gas and hotels.
That's what I've been doing just in the last 2 weeks, is driving across the country.
Mhm.
It's not quite the same as it used to be, is it?
Well, it's a finite supply of old stuff. I mean, I do find a lot of old stuff percolating out lately. And then the internet has gotten so big and so difficult that I find the average person can't really look things up. For a while, everyone was looking everything up, and and that's still happening. But now you look it up, and there's 17,000 hits, and you don't know what to do. You don't know what you're doing.
It's a big part of it is defining the search, isn't it? Because there is stuff on the internet, and it's I'm looking for 50s and 60s Canadian ephemera.
Mm-hmm.
You can put up all sorts of different words to try and narrow that one down.
Yeah, no, that's now you need a talent in substring searches and things just to know where to find things.
So tell me about some of your favorite scouting trips. Like,
well, I used to drive back and forth across the U.S. every year. I used to go to the California Book Fair every year, so I would drive across Ontario. And so, those were some good trips down through the South, but the books were never that great in the American South. The best books for book scouting, I suppose, were in New England, like Richard Chew and I would sometimes run around in New England, near Boston. And
what was the best store for scouting? Or do you want to tell those stores? Or are they
were
still
some-
around?
They're not still around.
No.
Well, Acres of Books in Cincinnati was a classic. I mean, we went there, and it was literally Acres of Books. The place was one of those huge downtown buildings with little 5 stories of books. Everything had been priced back in the 50s and 60s. So those places were all happy hunting grounds, and it depended what you needed. Like at one point, we got a want list. I used to work with Serendipity Books in Berkeley, Peter Howard, and a few other dealers. At one time, we got a want list from the university for American fiction, and that place that was collecting every single piece of American fiction.
Mm-hmm. Canadian University or American?
No, it was Ohio State.
So it was a new librarian that
It
was
was
seeing
just, I don't know, things
gaps,
got divvied up at some point, and somehow it fell to Ohio State to be the American fiction. And they've published huge reference books. They wanted it all, every single piece of fiction, which is a pretty tall order.
Right.
Anyway, we had these want lists. They were the size of telephone books.
Wonderful.
So we go to places like Acres of Books in Long Beach, California, or Acres of Books in Cincinnati. These were holdovers from the old days that were still open. And those places were were pretty great. We could buy hundreds of books, and they were very inexpensive. And, well, I used to go to England, and we had some good contacts over there. Martin Stone, Eric Korn, these were people who would take us around.
Drive you around?
Well, we usually had to drive. None of these guys would drive, but we'd have to go over there and rent a car, and we would go around Britain and in Wales. We had Jeff Towns would take us out scouting Wales.
He's still around?
Oh, sure. Yeah, he's got a book bus that's traveling around, and those were good trips. We scouted Tony Hattersley once, who was a famous collector in the north of England, up near Whitby, where Dracula is set. And he'd been a significant dealer for decades, and so a guy like that, he had just cellars and attics filled with antiquarian books.
And you just went through them all.
Well, it wasn't always easy to buy from these guys. They were a pretty cagey bunch, but as new collectors came along, or institutions went after different kinds of books, if you had some customers, you could have a bit of an edge, go around to those places. But those weren't so much book scouting as book buying. The scouting was, I've always thought, was more junk shops and antique stores and flea markets, and and a lot of good stuff's come out of there. Book fairs, like the little book fairs. There used to be little book fairs everywhere. I once got Ring Lardner's first book at an Ohio book fair. It's the second known copy of it.
Book fair, like a church sale or a
no,
book
these
sale,
were,
or these were actual fairs?
Antiquarian book fairs.
So they knew what they had?
Well, not really. Not every book fair is the same. I mean, some of these little book fairs, like in Ohio and Michigan, a lot of the dealers were just kind of house dealers, or not all exalted association booksellers. So everybody kind of dragged out whatever interesting old stuff they had, and there was no internet to look things up on, so you kind of had to know what you're doing.
That's the thing, isn't it? You have to keep it in your head.
Yeah, well, that's right.
Or in a notebook.
Yeah, well, that's what's put a lot of. That's what put Martin Stone, who was arguably the greatest book scout ever, and one of them. He just finally said that now that everyone could look everything up, it wasn't really.
Is he still around?
No, Martin died a couple of years ago.
Did he write a book?
There's a book about him that I contributed to. A bunch of us, it's sort of a bit trip. No, I suppose it's just a memorial volume about Martin Stone.
It's just called Martin Stone?
Yeah, I have it here.
So you think he was the greatest book scout?
Well, it's just a joke. I mean, I don't know. Consensus was usually that David Sachs in California was the world's greatest book scout. That's what Peter Howard said. Okay. And David was noted for his ability to ferret out things, or to look very, very carefully at everything, to find trial bindings and inscribed copies and unusual things that were not evident to most people.
Book about him?
No, David's always kind of flown under the radar. As far as I know, he's still going out in Oakland.
As a scout, or as his own shop?
Well, he never had a shop, but he has a premises.
What does that mean?
An apartment full of books.
Okay.
That you may or may not get to visit if he has something for you. And then there's, in England, of course, there's all these famous book runners, they call them, book scouts. I didn't really know any of them. There was a guy named Driffield.
Driff, the famous.
Driff was
curmudgeon.
a bit of a villain, and last I heard, someone saw him kind of raving on a street corner in London. But he left. He owed me money when he disappeared.
Did he?
Oh wow, he was a character. His guide to English bookshops is
pretty funny.
It's very funny. I still think of it all the time, and I use some of his acronyms. Like, farts, follows you around recommending the stock. Et Gao, easy to get on with. Those were all his acronyms.
Right. Okay, so what's your best advice to some book lover or book collector in terms of you being a good scout? Like, what do you look for? Because, I mean, sorry, I'm going to run on here, but like, often you won't find what you want, but you'll see, oh yes, I think that's an important book. Maybe I can trade that in, even though trade is really difficult these days. But anyway, given all of that, what do you say?
Yeah, I think just it's like anything. You got to put in the hours, and so you're just going to go out and look around and get familiar, learn publishers, and learn bindings, and learn to be able to just look at a wall of books and see that they're all, you know, reprints or wrong in some way, and be able to have looked at enough of them that you'll pick out the interesting ones. And
So what is give me an example of...
well, you look at some bunch of old fiction. I mean, you really want to look for the trade publishers. You don't even look at the Grosset and Dunlap reprints or the
reprint,
Triangle. You know, all these reprint kind of books. It's good to look at enough of them that you develop the ability to see what's there. And I guess if you're going to try to sell or trade books, I want to hang around with the people and do that and figure out what it is that they want that they aren't able to find, or what a lot of people are buying.
So you question the bookseller and say what's important,
put
what's
in
good.
the time. Yeah, you'd have to just put in the time, and I'd say avoid modern first editions. It's kind of a trap. Everyone that comes along seems to think they're going to get dealer or scout modern first editions, and that's just a sort of over-saturated market, and a lot of books most of the books now, and especially with the internet, are very common, and the bar for condition has gone up to the point where they have to be perfect, and so it's not very doable becoming a modern literature scout. But there's still a lot of interesting old books around.
Is it possible to be a scout now or not?
I don't think it's very sustainable to actually make a living as a book scout. I think that would be very difficult. I don't know anyone that's doing that anymore. If the odd person brings me, I've got 3 or 4 guys who bring me stuff, but it's just mostly kind of cannon fodder brought in. But no, to be a rare book scout, which is, I did that for years. That was what we did. We ran out of money or it was time to go on a trip. We'd bundle up and get out in the car and go out through Ohio or Pennsylvania, or run around these places, find stuff, and then bring it back and sell it. Now you save up money to go on the trip because you're not going to make anything.
That's right. Yeah,
it's more likely
if you break even.
It's more likely to cost you money to go on a scouting trip. But they were a kind of a viable money-making thing. Like when I had my shop in Toronto in the early 80s, I took the bus down to Buffalo and went through the bookshops like Mahoney and Weekly and some of the other shops, and I found all sorts of wonderful things. Like I found Ambrose Bierce's first book in the children's section for a couple $, a pseudonymous book, and there were things around, and these big shops, nobody really visited them much, and so it was possible to kind of go out and make it pay. But I think that'd be very difficult now, and it's a finite supply of old books. I mean, there's still stuff coming out, but it's not enough, I don't think. And now on the internet, everything's everywhere. Everyone knows everything. It's sort of hard to have an edge, like to buy the Atomic Energy book illustrated by Sendak for a couple of $, and get $300 for it to pay for your trip. That's harder to do. If you're going to bookstores, they mostly look things up.
Yeah.
But there's a few that don't. Like when in the early days of the internet, I was still running around book scouting, and there were shops we thought we would find guys who didn't want anything to do with the computer, or Luddites who had shops, and you'd go there because they didn't look everything up.
You needed the word on who didn't like computers.
Kind of, yeah, that's absolutely right.
You, I think you advertise the weird and obscure stuff. Like that's what you like, right?
It is,
like, what is that? Tell me what that is.
Well, that came from dealing in early fantasy fiction, especially. I had a friend, Stuart Tytler, who was a great collector and bookseller in Berkeley. He had Kaleidoscope books. He collected lost race fantasy fiction right back into the 18th century, mostly 19th century and early 20th century. And there was just a lot of it that wasn't recognized. You might make actual discoveries. Like I found an 1850s American novel that turned out to have fantastic content, underground cities, or this kind of fantasy literature. And so that was a category of books that you could still do something in. You could find them. Nobody really knew what they were. They had obscure, like, utopian content, or prehistoric content, or lost tribes, or all these kind of fantasy things that were being written about, sort of 1850 to 1930. So that was, for years, that was my special field, and I did a lot of catalogs and helped, I helped Stuart Titler build his collection. I ended up cataloging his collection when I went to work at Serendipity Books in Berkeley. We bought Stuart's collection and cataloged it. It's kind of it was one of a kind. He had a lot of rare books, only known copies of matriarchal, hollow earth science fiction novels by women published in towns in, Louisiana in the 19th century. One known copy, two known copies, that kind of thing. A lot of rare books. And
kind of amazing that someone in the rural Kentucky
Yeah.
would dream something like that and actually
published
have
in some,
it published.
yeah, in some steam press in the back of a drugstore. Yeah, they printed it up, and so that was a great learning experience for Stuart. And he had this warrant list he compiled, and he went about it very seriously. He went to the Library of Congress and looked up everything and tried to find out what was what. So I did about 35 catalogs of the weird and fantasy fiction, and Arkham House books and H.P. Lovecraft, all that stuff too. I bought a couple of big collections of that. So for a while I was a dealer in those books. I had H.P. Lovecraft's first book, one of 7, and Snakeskin, copyright copy book that would now be $150,000 probably.
How much did you sell it for?
Oh, I don't know. I sold it in 1979, for whatever.
Okay.
It doesn't matter.
Is this an area that you love to read in yourself?
It is, yeah. I read a lot of it. I like a lot of the sort of English weird authors, the weird fiction authors from, 1900 to 1920.
Like who?
William Pope Hodgson, the big one, and you could the regular ones, Arthur Machen and Algernon Blackwood, and those kind of M.P. Shield. They were all sort of 1890s kind of core stuff. So that was an interesting field. Yeah, and that's where I was working, and I have all the reference books and issued a lot of catalogs. So that was kind of there were a few of us not dealing in those books.
Curry was
Yeah,
one?
L.W. Curry's still always been the sort of big gun in that field. He's got all the books. And
I was down at his place in
Really?
Elizabethtown,
Sure,
New
yeah.
York,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
he's got one of those the stacks that you
does he?
crank.
Yeah, we had those at Serendipity. As well.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
So it's compacts and
Yeah, we had a bunch of them at Serendipity, actually, a dramatic amount of them. When we closed the shop, they couldn't get anyone to buy them. They were going for scrap.
yeah.
Tremendous thing. But you could move, 12 sections of tons of books with one hand.
Exactly, yeah.
Miraculous.
Yeah.
Yeah, really. They
Talk
really,
about sci-fi or technology
I know,
anyway.
they
yeah.
held a tremendous amount of stuff.
I didn't realize that you'd worked for
Yeah.
Peter Howard. For how long was that for?
Well, I knew him, and I was kind of part of Serendipity's scene for many years, but I actually went there in '96. I was there for about 4 years, lived 2 years in San Francisco and a couple in Berkeley. And I was an employee there, I think only for 1 year with a salary and everything. But the rest of the time I had a kind of an office upstairs there and worked there, cataloging all the weird fiction, the detective fiction and fantasy fiction. That was kind of my province at Serendipity. And yeah, we were pretty good friends, Peter. We traveled around a lot. We went to England and went on trips and did a lot of book fairs and stuff.
He's a bit of a legend.
Oh yeah, Peter. Yeah.
Why is he a legend?
Well, he was kind of like the old school American entrepreneur who was an English professor and educated person and applied an actual business model to the book business, which most booksellers don't. And he had 2 accountants full time. And
He had about like a bunch of stores, right?
well, no, Peter just had the
No?
one big shop
Okay.
on Shattuck Avenue, and then moved over to University Avenue in Berkeley. But what he had was about 500,000 books. But he took things on consignment. We had stuff from 200 consigners. I mean, it was really on a grand scale. It's why you needed accountants. Every book was coded with where it came from, who the consigner was, what the deal was, what the percentages were, so on. He had a lot of deals with institutions like Ohio State. He'd say, send me all your duplicates, and as I sell them, I'll credit you against the books you're buying from me. Well, he did that with a number of major institutions. And he bought things. He bought the entire special collections of a Nevada University library at one time. The entire thing. Like a complete
What?
collection of English literature. It was vast.
They just wanted to get out of that?
Yeah, they just had a librarian had built this collection back in the 50s or something, and it wasn't being used. And so they sold them, and it had like all of the Hogarth Press and all of Robert Graves, all them sort of new CBEL authors, complete with all their first edition, signed limited. It was kind of unbelievable. So he would do things like that, big, buy something like that for $300,000, and everyone would be going, "Oh my God, what a huge amount of money!" Well, it was all gotten back in no time, and he had oceans of books left. So he did a lot of things like that, of greater magnitude than most books can ever do, just bigger buys. And he liked to do that, buy a ton of great books and all at once.
And the trick is, of course, knowing that this is for sale, or making the proposal, or as you say, entrepreneurial.
He wasn't afraid to follow up on stuff like that most people just wouldn't be able to deal with.
Right.
But Peter liked everything, all the books. It wasn't just, we all had $10,000 and $20,000 books. He had those. But right down to the smallest poetry pamphlet. And every book had an individual, was dealt with individually and coded. And so it was, And every bookseller liked going there. Peter would, prices were mercurial. If you knew how to buy books there, you knew how to look at the codes. If he hadn't paid anything, or it was consigned from his favorite bookseller, and you weren't going to get any kind of deal. So you just piled up what you wanted there, and people would go through and pencil in circled net prices, and you bought books that way. And so I've kind of tried to follow his footsteps in that regard, rather than having your prices be some kind of holy, graven in stone thing. His prices were kind of meaningless, honestly.
I don't understand.
He just didn't, books were all priced, and they're often priced kind of high, but there wasn't a linear relationship between that and how much you had to pay. Like a book price at $47.50, you might buy for $8.
Who might buy it?
Anybody.
Like going into the store?
When you went into Serendipity, yeah.
You mean, but you could look at, he priced it at $47, you could say, I'll only pay $8 for that?
No, you didn't say anything.
You didn't say anything?
To him. Peter would price the books for you, and if you liked to, or he thought you were had virtue.
Okay. So you do that?
I do, yeah, absolutely.
So if you like someone, you're going to give them a better deal.
Or just that it seems, and it depends where the books came from too. If I paid a lot for them, or I got them yesterday, then probably not.
I see.
But a guy did it yesterday, some set of No Such Dickens that's been here forever, and offered me some kind of low price. I said, yeah.
Oh, nice. Well, you know what, too? It's partly, if you get a reputation for giving out good deals, that gets around.
It does, too, yeah.
Yeah, it helps you.
Yeah.
To some extent.
Yeah, but anyway, that was, the whole Serendipity thing. That had a lot to do with Bill Hoffer as well, who was kind of my mentor in the business. He and I were just down the block from each other on 10th Avenue. So
that was my next question, actually, to tie, because I understood from someone that Peter Howard got his Hoffer's papers and placed them in Indiana. Is that true or not?
He sent them to the Lily.
And they took them?
Yeah.
So there's a great example of a Canadian... Canadian documentation of history of one of the great booksellers.
Yeah, they were pretty good. They were sitting around for a long time, and then when his dad died, we got all that stuff back from his dad's estate to Bill Hoffer's dad's estate. So
because his dad died after him, of course, because he died young, right?
Bill was only 52. He smoked
and drank
a lot of cigarettes.
Right?
Yeah, he drank a fair amount. He wasn't a huge drunk or anything.
No.
We drank scotch and stuff when we were traveling and that, but no, it was the cigarettes killed him. He smoked constantly at all times. So, one of those guys.
Could you tell me a bit more about him? Or it's a long story.
Well, I met him. I went in his shop on 10th Avenue. It was called Falstaff Books. This is in the mid-70s, early mid-70s, and bought my first book, which was a Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring, first edition, for $15. Nice copy and dust jacket. This would have been about 1973 or 4. But, then I got a job in a bookstore in Saskatoon in 1974 or 5. And in there one day, these two guys came through.
Used bookstore or full? Or
used bookstore, Westgate Books out in 22nd Avenue in Saskatoon. In a little strip mall.
Okay.
And one day these two guys came through, Bill Hoffer and Don Stewart on their way to the Winnipeg book sale, the yearly Winnipeg book sale. And they'd stopped in and scouted the place and bought some James Bond first editions and this and that. I talked to them for a few minutes and learned about this Winnipeg book sale and this whole book trade thing. And so next year I went to it as well. And it was, and those guys were there. So yeah, I got to know them.
They had a booth?
No, the book sale is at the Pool Park Shopping Center in Winnipeg, and it was just a huge used book sale run by ladies.
Okay.
They had about 6 or 8 kiosks.
Okay. And this was the place to go to get
the
good
transport trucks full of books. The book sale went for 2 weeks.
Huh?
The Winnipeg Polo Park book sale. Yeah, we bought oceans of books.
Still on or not?
Don't know.
Dunno.
I haven't been in a long time.
Okay,
this
sure.
was in the 70s, so that's where I got to know them. And then when I moved
Did you buy a bunch of books?
Oh yeah, it was great. Cool.
And you set up your own shop?
Well,
from
shortly
that?
after I set up a shop in Vancouver on 10th Avenue in 1976. That's when I opened Star Treader Books, it was called. It was I bought a science fiction collection of 10,000 items. And so I set up this science fiction bookshop with my then partner, Terry Rutherford. And Hoffer was just about a block down on the same street. And his apartment was halfway between our shops. So we would meet breakfast every day. And we got to know him pretty well just by having bookshops on the same little strip.
What characterized him as being, like, he's something special, right?
Yeah. Well, Bill was kind of a wild man. Well, he had a serious case of diabetes. So he was injecting insulin constantly, and it was kind of always getting out of control. So he had a lot of episodes of kind of insulin-related illness and health things. And he was very politically minded and been involved in the kind of political turmoil at Simon Fraser, I think in the early 70s, or late 60s even. And so...
Communist?
I wouldn't say, no. I don't know. It was more of a intellectual... I know, we talked a lot. Marxist, Leninist, Mao Zedong thought as applied to the book trade. It was kind of, I don't know, it's hard to characterize him.
Okay.
But he became very politically active in the book trade and authored a new constitution for the Antiquarian Booksellers Association of Canada, which, caused all sorts of furor. There was a lot of kind of Machiavellian machinations where, information was leaked to some bookseller in the East to see where it came back from, and all that kind of. He really lived for that kind of thing. And
he enjoyed this
absolutely,
scrap?
yeah. He thought that Canadians were trained bears, he said, and it was a really kind of a boring place. And he finally just had enough, and he left and went to Russia.
Yes, yes.
But
I understand that his father administered LSD to Huxley. Is that a...
Yeah, his dad is known for early LSD experimentation in the 60s, but I don't think on a grand scale.
No.
But
it's coming back now. It's
yeah,
quite,
absolutely, yeah. But there was always rumor that or talk that Bill had been given LSD by his dad when he was young, so,
That explained it?
I think that was probably nonsense.
Okay.
But his father was a very intimidating character.
Doctor, of course.
Dr. Hoffer. He was the author of hundreds of publications, and he worked with Linus Pauling over in England. Hypoglycemia, nicotinic acid, and vitamin C therapy. That was what he was doing.
But what about Bill himself and books? Like he just knew what. He argued well. His catalogs are, again, they're hilarious.
Well, he specialized in Canadian poetry and Canadian literature and knew a lot of the publishers and the poets and the authors and that. So, yeah, he could write at length.
Personally?
Yeah. So that was why a lot of the catalogs are filled with... and he used the catalogs to sort of attack, unworthy...
which 99% of it he thought was... Maybe not 99.
Yeah, he also liked what he called, not colonial literature, but Commonwealth literature.
Oh, yes.
And so he kind of like that, too. He used to buy and sell sort of Australian stuff. And
interesting.
Going to Australia. And he had kind of strong relationships with booksellers all over the place. We actually had a secret society within the book trade again, called the Armadillos. And he forged and had produced sterling silver armadillo pins for armadillos who were friendly. So if you went to, say, Australia and someone was an armadillo, well, it was a place you could count on
Lovely.
support. It was everything was.
Did you have a secret handshake?
Not quite. But there was his publication that he started was Tanks, and that was all based on this kind of wartime publication called Tanks Are Mighty Fine Things, which is a little book about tanks. It's hard to encapsulate it all, but the point was kind of to destroy the government funding of art, which he thought had really compromised the quality of stuff that had been published in, the whole Canada Council. And so that whole idea of tanks was to steamroller and destroy this whole modality. So that was a big thing. Yeah, there was a lot going on with Hoffer. We fell out for years. I didn't see him for ages.
Yeah, that's kind of standard procedure with it.
We ended up being friends. And
at the end.
Later, and he was coming to California. And when he was in Russia, he had a strong relationship with Serendipity still. So we were buying and selling books and shipping stuff around and money. He had Peter Howard had gone up to Vancouver and gotten Bill's entire stock and brought it back to California. As it was consigned at Serendipity and being sold, and he was being credited. So there was a whole financial thing going on, and so we had and when he came back from Russia, he would come there and
pick up his check.
Well, or just be around. We'd go on books going that way.
Right.
Yeah. So that was Hoffer was we had a lot of good times. We used to we went to England a few times. We went to around America quite a lot. And we drove out to the Winnipeg book sale in Vancouver and back and things like that. He was a good book. He was a good bookseller, and he never made any money. He ended up with a pretty good stock of Antiquarian books. He liked the English book trade. He made a lot of friends in the kind of the Eatons and people like that in the London book trade. He kind of liked the upper echelon London. He was hanging around with one of the Maggs brothers and so on. So we had some pretty fun times running around looking for books, and he was a good bookseller, good book scout. Knew what he was doing.
And he published as well.
Oh yeah. There's a whole bibliography of his.
I just bought it from Glenn.
From Glenn, yeah. No, I've supplied Glenn with a lot of stuff that I had, like unique stuff that. Proofs of this and that. We ended up with a lot of his stock after Peter Howard died and Serendipity closed. Peter Gray, Renaissance Books here in Victoria. He and I went down and bought the residue of the Canadian literature at Serendipity, Berkeley, which was like walls of stuff. We took everything we could manage, and we still have piles of it. I still have tons of it, but it was Hoffer's stuff, and so it's all the bits and pieces of correspondence and pamphlets, and there's a lot of that still. I've never managed to process.
That's the thing. If you're able to process everything, you'd be a millionaire.
Well, I wish, yeah.
But if you can make it accessible.
It's just time. It's just from the pile into something that people can look at. But minor Canadian literature is not something that's really
not now
financially
anyway.
Rewarding to deal with.
Actually, there's one book I'm after. It's called The Dark Weaver. You got a copy of that?
Dark Weaver sounds familiar. Who's the author?
It's Salverson. It's
right.
Governor. It's the only governor.
It's the Governor General
that I didn't.
Novel.
That I haven't gotten.
So
It's Ryerson.
Ryerson. Yeah, no, I do know it now. I know to look for that book, and it does that for you.
Yeah.
Laura Goodman Salverson.
Yes, that's right. She's Icelandic, or at least that's her background. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Well.
Anyway,
good to know.
It's about the only one I care about.
Interesting.
But okay, so just finally, what's your future here? You just want to do this for the rest of your life until you fall dead?
I just turned 65. I don't know. Yeah, maybe.
Lovely little sort of touristy town you're in.
It is. This is to me. I've kind of gone back into the used book business. I wasn't really buying and selling oceans of paperbacks and stuff for the last 20 or so years. So
what were you doing?
I was selling books on the internet through the mail or rare books. Selling books to institutions for a long time. My best customer was the University of Toronto. I had an exclusive
Fisher
want list from. Wasn't so much Fisher. I had their English literature want list. It was a librarian that that I got to know, and Christina Duff Stewart, who was, I worked with her, and so I did things like that, selling a lot of books. I used to sell books to the National Library of Canada, that kind of thing, and to, institutions, clients and stuff. So I wasn't really processing or dealing with quantities of used books. But now, this place is like a furnace that burns, oceans of these books. So, and it's got a big rent and a lot of kind of...
Oh, does it? Yeah, well, of course, you're right close to the main street, aren't you?
It's two shops. And when they moved Haunted out here, it was just the one side, and then they expanded into this second side. So, and it's good. I think it's a comfortable size. My shop, I had another shop down in Victoria on 4th Street, and it was too small. I just couldn't have...
But you're still running it.
It's still open for now. Yeah, it's open on as a vintage clothing and antique and bookshop, probably just for the summer, but maybe more. Yeah, maybe longer.
Okay.
But it's kind of small, and this place is big enough that I can actually have decent sections.
Are you going to replace everything that's here, or?
Oh, I'm going to change a few things.
Tinker.
Yeah, I can see some of these departments are pretty dead, like.
Yeah.
And so
in other words, what? They're not turning over?
Yeah, like railway books. I mean, I don't sell very many.
No.
I've got a huge section of mountaineering books. These are residue of big collections that Odean bought, and they're perfectly good books, and they're just a lot of space devoted to something that's not really selling. So these days, I don't know, I'd rather deal more in history and in older books and in more art and literature and poetry and illustrated books. I like a lot. So. But, the book business is an opportunistic business. I mean, if a collection of bird books come along, I'm a bird book dealer.
Right.
And, I got a collection of maps 2 years ago of right back into the 16th and lots of 17th century maps. So, big learning curve on those, but now I've got about 500 maps, and a lot of early maps. So I'm trying to learn enough about those to be able to do maps and nautical charts.
So in other words, learn enough about those so that you can tell a good story about each of them to be able to sell it. Is that it?
Well, to sell it and just to be able to recognize it and to, understand what reference books you need and what you need to know. And like maps is a whole other thing. Like, that's a big one. Like dealing in maps, you don't say, oh, I'm going to deal in old maps. It's like, okay, there's shelves of giant reference works, and the maps are incredibly complicated, and it's a little different than the book trade, I'm finding, but not so different. Bibliographically, they're paper, they're printed, they're colored, they have imprints, they have to be looked up, there's issue points. A guy just asked me about that big map up there. That's the lost map from Captain Cook's voyage. It was done in 1784, and they argued about it, so it didn't get included in the big edition of Cook when it was published. And that map's now sort of $13,000 map. But I've got the second edition from 1791 here. And it's basically a big overview of Captain Cook's voyages. So that's, more like an $800 map. But it looks identical to the...
it's just got, a different date. That's about it?
That's about it. So, it's that...
you have to know it, obviously.
You have to know. And so, luckily, one of the map collections I got came with a lot of the principal reference books. Like big 7-volume sets of kind of where you look up what you've got. So that was very helpful. Because those books aren't really available online, those reference books. And so if you want to know what you're doing, or what you actually got, you have those reference books. Which is true of a lot of reference books, I find. When you really get down to nitty-gritty, you have to have... Even this book I got yesterday, the Maurice Sendak, turns out it's got issue points. The original price on the vest wrapper needs to be a certain thing, and the end papers are a kind of textured end papers in the first issue. So, luckily mine has the textured end paper. But to keep...
Well, it keeps your brain active too,
doesn't
doesn't
it? To have
it?
some integrity about what you've got, and to be able to properly describe things.
Yes, of course.
And that's...
You don't want to sell stuff that's not what you're saying it is.
No, that's right. No misrepresentation.
Not that hasn't happened before in the business.
It still happens now with all this stuff on the internet. I'd say half of it is
they don't know.
misdescribed.
They just don't know.
I have no idea. a thing. So yeah, and in the Booksellers Association, we've always tried to have that level of some professionalism where we actually, things are what we say they are, and if they're not, we'll take
To
it
the
back.
best of your knowledge, yeah.
If they're not, they're returnable. And,
Yeah.
So it's still like that. But yeah, anyway, it's all a lot of fun.
Well, one more question. We're sitting by a table with a bunch of ephemera on it, and I've just gone to the dark side with ephemera in the last year or so, and I love it. Any comments on how that's doing? Is it growing?
I think it's growing. I think it's because it's so ephemeral and so likely to be missed in the kind of reference works and that. It's just the books are now, everything's so understood, they're all listed, they're all on the internet, it's all kind of, obvious. A lot of the ephemera is not. It's unique, it's interesting, it's rare.
And it's reflective of the times too, in a really interesting way.
It is, and ephemera about books and publishing, or you get to see the underpinnings of things and how they were marketed, and there's a lot more depth to it, and so I've always had tons of ephemera.
Yes.
And early paper stuff. I've always liked anything paper cover, pulp magazines, paper stuff. So I have oceans of it. This is just a sample.
Copy of the Country Diaries and the Guardian Lady?
Not right now. I just sold the last one. You sold about 4 of them in the last month.
Yeah, that's a popular title.
Perennial bestseller. Yeah, that's the thing.
Why is it such a popular?
I don't know. This shop sells that kind of book. It's just, we could pound them through here like it's...
It doesn't matter what edition?
It doesn't seem to.
Well, you should print them up yourself.
Oh, well. I've never wanted to be a publisher.
Okay.
Lots of booksellers do, but it never appealed to me to have an imprint and start,
Yeah.
There's enough to deal with. It takes all my time.
Well, yeah, there's so much to learn. And I've learned a lot talking to you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks, Nigel. And we'll onward.
Onward and upward. I've been speaking to Bill Matthews, who is the proprietor now of the Haunted Bookshop in Sydney, British Columbia on Vancouver Island. Thanks again.
Thanks.